Good morning. Good morning. I feel like I'm back in the classroom, although I never did go in front of a podium. We're going to get started here just a little bit with Pastor Barb has some things to share with us. Before we do that, I just the council wanted to thank Pastor Barb and the Synod. They've been nothing but helpful to us. They've given us lots of options. They have helped set up pulpit supply through the rest of December and first part of January, which is nice because I didn't have to do that. So otherwise, I'd have to be preaching, and you do not want that. So thank you for all of your help with there. I'm just going to give you a real brief of where we're at in our call process because Pastor Barb's going to give you more detail. We are entering into a contract, as I said out in the email, with Reverend Jessica Bakken-Bush. And I'm not going to give lots of details because I always think it's better for those people to introduce themselves. So she'll be here at some point and you'll get a chance to know more about her. But a few things. We are working on the Bridge to Settle model. And again, Pastor Barb will tell us more about that. Pastor Jess has 13 years of experience. She's had experience as a youth director. She's had experience as both large city churches and rural communities. Her father is a pastor. Her brother is a pastor. So there's a lot of history there. And her grandparents were married in the United Church. So she has some connection already here with us. She will be officially starting with us January 16th. But she is going to be doing pulpit supply for us on December 24th for those two services that we have there. So that's kind of where we're at this point as far as mine, so I'll turn over to Barb here.
Good job, Matt. Thank you, Matt. I want to give kudos to your council. They are phenomenal. Their care for the well-being of this congregation is so evident in the conversations we've had and the questions they've asked, the decisions they've made. So, and Matt, it's really important to have a really strong and just a well-equipped president during transition time. And so I just want to say thank you for the work that you have done. I don't know, is your annual meeting coming up? Are you?
End of January.
Are you still,
Yeah, he's going to be reelected.
Okay, good to know.
I didn't hear that.
Nothing that you really need to worry about. Don't worry about it. So I'm just going to give you a little overview of kind of the process that we've been in and then talk to you more about this pink sheet that I handed out to you. As Matt mentioned, that we were blessed to have found pulpit supply coverage for you until we could figure out what was going to be next. Pastor David Wall will be coming and will be providing most all of that for you, but there were weeks that he was not available. This was one of them. So it's my joy to be here with you. I'll also be here Christmas morning. If anybody wants to come and worship on Christmas morning, I'll be with you that day too. So originally, when I came to meet with your council, one of the things we talk about is what are the next steps after your pastor leaves. And in most cases, our best practice and the direction we want to go is to bring a trained interim pastor into your midst to do two things. To be your pastor in all ways that your previous pastor was in all the ministries, and then also to walk with you through the transition and the call process. So I know that I talked to somebody who's been on a call committee before, and you know, it's the whole idea of doing a self-study with the congregation to learn about where you're at today. What's important to you today in your ministries? What are you looking for in a pastor? And then to complete the document called the Ministry Site Profile, that will be the document that we send to potential candidates. So our first place we tried to go is to bring an interim to you. We did find an interim who was going to start with you, and then after the contract was signed, he had to bow out for health reasons. And so then it was time to come back to the council again. One of the other models of transition time coverage that I had shared with them was called a bridge to settled model. At the time that we had brought interim Pastor Mike to you, that wasn't an option, the bridge to settled. The bridge to settled model, kind of all the stars have to align. So what those stars are is number one, that we don't have an interim pastor, because that's our first hope. Number two is that there's actually a settled pastor, somebody who's not an interim, who's available and has a deep interest in the ministries of this church and would want to consider to serve here. And number three, that the church is healthy, has good health generally, spiritually, financially, and relationally. So a non-conflicted church. So in talking with your council, originally this bridge to settled model was not an option for you because we had an interim, and at the time there wasn't a pastor who was looking for a call. Well, as God would have it, Pastor Mike called and said that he was not able to continue as an interim, and I also got a call from a pastor, Jessica Bachenbush, who was serving another congregation who was feeling that it was time to move on from that congregation. And so I'm going to talk about this pink page and then continue the narrative so that you have a good understanding of what this model is. It's pretty new to our synod. It's been used much more in the East Coast areas where there's a real shortage of pastors, both settled pastors and interim pastors. So as a previous teacher, I don't like to stand in front of people and just read, but I'm going to just stand in front of you and read, because I don't know how better to say it than what you see here. So the traditional path for a congregation whose pastor leaves is to move into what we call the transition time, or you can hear it referred to as the interim time, because typically this is the time when an intentional interim pastor comes to serve a congregation until the Holy Spirit brings the next settled pastor to your congregation. That's where we thought we were with interim Pastor Mike. The reality of the church at this time is that the number of open calls or congregations needing an intentional interim surpasses the number of interim pastors available. So a shortage. And thus we didn't have an interim for you. A new model that we offer, if a pastoral candidate is available, is called the Bridge to Settled model, in which a pastor who is open to and hoping for a settled long-term call in a congregation agrees to serve as a short-term bridge. Think of a bridge as filling a gap or covering a gap for you in a congregation, and who is then considered for the call as a settled long-term pastor. So if you've ever had an interim before, you know that interims can't become the settled pastor of a congregation. That's not part of what they do. They come and they go. A bridge pastor can be considered for the call if the congregation and the bridge pastor feel like it's going really well. So with this model, there's three parts. The bridge pastor comes to serve the congregation for a specified amount of time as both the pastor and the congregation get to know each other. That time could be as short or as long as seems right for the congregation and the pastor. So in other words, your council gets to choose that time frame along with that pastor. The congregational council has the constitutional authority to contract with a bridge pastor because contracting does not require a congregational vote. They would contract with an interim pastor as well. It doesn't require a congregational vote. Part two then. So you have a bridge pastor who comes on for a particular amount of time. In that time, a call committee is raised up by the congregation following the direction of your constitution. And the congregation engages in what we call the call process, which includes a self-study and completing that ministry site profile, that document. That's really important. The bridge pastor is available to serve as a resource and support to the call committee during this time as the bridge pastor continues to serve as your pastor. However, the assistant to the bishop for call process, aka Barb Street, is the primary pastoral support for the self-study and the call committee.
That's her in case you.
That's me. So you're kind of getting a twofer. So you'll have Pastor Jess serve you for all your pastoral needs and be your pastor. I will be, in essence, your interim to help you through the call process. So I'll be out here quite a bit working with your call committee and doing the work that an interim pastor would have done in that way. So the self-study is done, the ministry site profile, that document is completed. We move to part 3. The bridge pastor who has been serving the congregation and the call committee have an interview to discern if they feel God is calling the bridge pastor and the congregation to a long-term relationship to be your settled pastor. If yes, then the bridge pastor is brought before the congregation for a congregational vote. Because to have your long-term pastor, it is your authority, the congregation, to vote to bring that person on. If the call committee and or the pastor or it's mutually have decided that this was good for a season, but this isn't the right person, then it's a no. That person will continue to serve you, but you then, the call committee, will start receiving other candidates to consider because we've gone through the call process. Nothing is being put on hold. You will be going through the call process, so at that point, you will be ready. If this is not a fit, you'll be ready your call committee will be ready to interview other pastors. And the bridge pastor will be ready to interview with other congregations. I would say the greatest, I don't want to say risk, but like probably the greatest stepping out in uncertainty of this model is on the part of the pastor. In this case, Pastor Jessica Bachenbush lives in Casson, and she's not going to be moving for this bridge contract, but sometimes a pastor will move for this. So you can see how it's a little bit riskier for a pastor, like do I move me and or my family, and it's not a certainty that it's going to be. We have used this model, I think about 4 times in our synod. One example is Trinity at Hayfield. Used this model, and Pastor Kristen Anderson, who had been serving elsewhere in our synod, specifically wanted to be closer to the Austin area, and this position happened to be open, and I didn't have an interim, so they entered into this. They signed a year contract, and in that year I worked with them through the call process and everything, and then did the interview, and decided that they would bring it to the congregation, that they felt that there was a good relationship there, and then let the congregation decide, and the congregation decided in favor of. So there have been other ones in Winona right now at Faith in Winona. We're right in the middle of the process. Pastor Greg Schaefer is there. They decided to sign a 2-year contract. It's arbitrary, it's whatever you want. And they've done the interviews, and they are going to bring it before the congregation. The call committee and the pastor feel that it's a good fit, and they want the congregations to decide. So it has worked, and I think it works whether the pastor's called or not. The point of the model is to see if it's a good fit. It's different. When I learned about it, the synod that was using it said, not on paper, but they call it the try it on and see if it fits model. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound very holy, but but that's the model we're talking about. So Pastor Jessica Bachenbush has served in our synod and was feeling the Spirit calling her to a new call. And I mentioned this call, and I said, but they're not really ready yet. We haven't gone through the call process. And then I said, would you be interested in having a conversation with them, with the council, about this bridge to settled model? And she said yes. And so Pastor Jessica and I met with the council and just had a very open conversation. I think with this model, you have to be really transparent. You have to put all your cards on the table. There's no point in not just being completely honest and truthful about how things are going or anything. I mean, we all have the same end goal in mind, which is to continue to make sure that the people of United Redeemer are being served and served well. That's the pastor's goal, that's your council's goal, and I'm sure your goal as well, and the Synod's. So we had that conversation, and that conversation was to see if the council and if Pastor Jess even felt like, do we want to take the next step, which would be an actual interview without me present? Is there enough there in our conversation that we feel like this has possibilities? And they did. And so then they scheduled an actual interview with her, and had discernment. Your council had discernment after that interview, and prayer to decide, do we want to try this? And do we want to try it with Jess? And they decided yes. And so then they called Pastor Jess and said, we would like to try this. Would you like to try this? And would you like to try this with us? And she said yes. So that brings us to this moment in time where Pastor Jess will begin mid-January, I believe. I think she's on a trip to Greece in the first couple of weeks of January. So as soon as she returns, she will come to serve you. And did you decide on, did you do a year contract, 1 year contract? You all get to try her on and see if she fits, I guess. I don't know. So, this is a lot right now, but I would welcome any questions that come to mind, or even if you want to just share a statement, or it doesn't have to be a question.
Got the microphone ready, whoever wants. This is a two-way street, correct? So
Absolutely.
she's signing a contract for a year, but she doesn't like it here. So we all have to act our best.
Yeah, it is a two-way street. And one of the things that I talked to your council about, as well as, well, for you all, I'm really glad you asked that question, because we don't want this to end up being a year-long interview. Like, oh man, that sermon, it was really bad, we don't want her. You know, or, wow, that was great, of course we do. We want you to be able to just live with her as your pastor, and of course you'll form opinions. That's what's going to happen. But, you know, grace abounds, you know. She'll probably screw up sometimes, and that's okay.
But we know Margie never screwed up, right?
No. So, but it is a two-way street, and ultimately we just want to make sure both the pastor and the congregation feel like this is something that you would want to enter into long-term. The council also asked, you know, what if it's not going well, like after 3 months or 4 months or 6 months? The contract allows for termination of the contract with a 30-day notice by the bishop or the council or the pastor. We will never make you keep somebody that doesn't feel right for you. Been there, done that, right? It's a new day, sister. We've got a new Synod staff. And for a pastor as well, you know. So.
I just want to say I'm really grateful to learn that we are a healthy congregation enough that we can do this process.
Yeah.
That was great news.
Yeah. I'm happy about that too.
Anyone else?
How many openings in the city right now?
Yeah, how many openings in the Synod? Full-time openings. So we have about, right now we're doing really well. We probably have about 15 full-time openings, which is, we have 165 congregations. 15, and that's folks in different parts of the call process. Like a congregation's pastor just retired, so they're just starting the call process. Currently, we have about 4 congregations that are at the end of it interviewing. And so those 12 to 15 are somewhere in the midst of their self-study, things like that. We're really fortunate in our synod. I'll say, geography has become a blessing for us. We are close to metro areas, both Rochester and the Twin Cities, and that seems to be something that is really attractive to folks because of opportunities for jobs, for spouses, or significant others, things like that. Also, 35W and I-90 are blessings to us because all along you have communities of 20,000 plus. And when I say that, I think about southwestern Minnesota that is very, very rural. They have over 200 congregations, less people. That means they have a lot of really little congregations with not very many people in them. And they all need pastors. So they probably have around 50 openings. South Dakota, same thing. We have, in our region is Minnesota, North and South Dakota. So there's two, North Dakota is 2 synods, South Dakota is 1 whole synod. Lot of rural ministry out there, and not, for pastors who love rural ministry, that's great, but you have to think about people's families too, what's available to them for jobs or education or Target. That's a question on the self-study. Do you need to be near Target? I laugh because actually a pastor who filled out their paperwork, that was one of their requests, that they be within a reasonable driving distance to Target. And we said, well, you might want to go to a different synod if that's your priority. Yep, microphone is coming to you.
I thought at the beginning you said that an interim pastor will not ever be called. That's not their job or what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought earlier we read this Jess's name as an interim.
She's not an interim, she's a bridge. So if you did, that was just a miss.
So are we not going to have an interim then? We're going right to her on the 16th of January as a bridge?
Correct.
No interim?
Correct.
Okay.
Pat, you'll meet Pastor David Wall, who will be coming to do, he's kind of also called a bridge, but his time period is like 6 weeks.
Okay.
And so he'll be there here to do worship with you, and then also emergency pastoral care. Yeah, so, yeah. As far as an interim, you get me. Yes.
So you had said earlier that she wouldn't be moving here. Is that like temporarily wouldn't be moving here? But if we called her as a permanent pastor, would that ever be an option, or she would never move here?
I don't know
if you have that question or not.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say the word never, but I would anticipate that it would be her desire to stay in Casson. She and her husband own a home there. I think he's a business owner there. So she would be a commuting pastor. Yeah. Unless the Holy Spirit stirs something in them. So start praying now. No, I don't know. No, I like to be real with you also, as honest as I can about stuff like that. I would guess that she would desire to be a communion pastor. Funerals, yes. Until Pastor Jess comes, you mean?
Yeah, and after she comes.
So Pastor Jess is an ordained pastor. She'll do all the funerals, weddings. She'll be your pastor. In between, Pastor David Wall will do any funerals that are coming up. And I don't believe there are any weddings scheduled at this time between now and January 15th. I don't think, but good question. And as far as confirmation goes, actually, I'm coming on December 3rd, I think it is, to do confirmation, and the week after, 2 weeks after that, or a week after that, Bishop Hassanelli's coming to do confirmation with your kids. So, she's pretty excited.
As regards to funerals, Leah, we asked her that in our interview. Are you comfortable, would you be comfortable doing a funeral like a day after you started? And she said, yeah, I kind of like doing funerals.
Yeah. I actually do too. It's a holy time. It's a privilege. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Is she middle-aged or?
Yeah, she's in her 40s. Yep. Married about 3 years ago, I believe. She has a stepson from her husband's previous marriage. She grew up in Northfield, Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah, we had Margie for 9 years, so
Yeah.
it's kind of nice.
Yeah, it is.
She'd be at the right age to give us long-term.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Could you review the duties of the call committee and what they're, I mean, it's like they study her to begin with? Was that it?
So the question was, could you review a little bit of the duties of a call committee? So first of all, your call committee, when you look at your constitution, it will tell you your constitution governs what your call committee makeup will be. So that will be the responsibility of your council to look up. The call committee has primarily two responsibilities. The first is called, okay, I'm gonna back up. Our call process has 4 phases. The first phase is when it's called the transition, when you find out your pastor's going, and in that phase, I come and work with your council to figure out what's next. You've graduated phase 1. Phase 2 is now the responsibility of the call committee, and that's the congregational self-study. So what we will do, I'll do an orientation with them, and what they're gonna do is engage you all in a process to learn what's important to you as far as ministries, and what's important to you as far as the gifts that you believe your next pastor should possess or have. They're also going to ask you all sorts of questions that deal with what is most important to you. I have a model that has worked really well that I will share with your call committee that takes 6 weeks of gathering things, and then they put that together in what's called a ministry site profile. It's about a 13-page document that is submitted, and that is the first document that is given to potential candidates. So your call committee during phase 2 isn't really considering Pastor Jess at all. She's just being your pastor. What they're doing is engaging you all to understand what's important to you in the life of your church right now. So once that ministry site profile is submitted, that's the end of phase 2, and we move into phase 3, which is when your call committee engages in interviews. After I've done some vetting, in this case of Pastor Jess first. And your call committee, anybody here been on a call committee? Okay, it's a little bit odd if you've ever been on one. You're going, how do you interview somebody that you've already been with for a year? Like, how do you act like you don't know them? So it's an interesting little tightrope that you have to walk. But I'll share with them how do you come to the table to have an honest interview with somebody that actually has been serving you for a year. So we'll talk a lot about that. If Pastor Jess desires to be interviewed, if she feels like, yeah, I might want to stay here long term, if they would have me, then they would engage in that interview. If no, as I mentioned, then your call committee would start receiving other candidates' paperwork and start interviewing other people. So the call committee really has 2 phases of work. Some congregations divide that up into 2 different groups. The call committee always has to do the interviewing, but you could have a self-study team do the self-study. If people like, I do the call committee, but do I want to do both of those? You can decide that. Your council will talk to you about that too. You know, are there enough people here that more people want to be involved in different ways? We can have 2 different groups. But is that helpful?
Well, it doesn't sound like a call committee until the vote is no, is the way I look at it.
Oh, well, actually, that's what all call committees do. Yeah, it's pretty much the same process. Like, I would say the same things.
if the vote is no, then you look at other candidates. But before that vote, you're only studying the congregation and the pastors.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if the call committee says we don't want to bring you in front of the congregation because it feels like it's not a fit, they wouldn't, and they would, so, yeah.
What is she doing right now? What is her background or?
Yep, she has been a pastor, as Matt mentioned. Well, first of all, she was a youth director up in the cities at Mount Olivet in Minneapolis. And Gloria Day. And then she entered into seminary, and her first call was in Illinois, I think at a 2-point congregation. She wanted to get back into Minnesota to be near family. And so she had her first call at St. Paul's, in our Synod, St. Paul's of Pine Island. She was only there for about 1.5 years, and it appeared that they were going to have to cut in their next budget cycle. So she felt like she saw the writing on the wall and wanted to be proactive to seek out a new call so that they wouldn't have to make a decision to cut.
They had 2 pastors at the time.
Yeah, thank you for that. So she accepted a call at Faith and Dodge Center after that, and that's where she most recently has been serving.
Okay, for those of us that are trying to hold things together
I know,
before
I'm
everything
sorry.
happens, I need to have people talk to me about, you know, what they want with some of the altar and stuff, so I don't know if I need to talk to you, or, because sometimes Pastor Marty had her own ideas, and sometimes we followed what is in that piece of paper.
Yeah.
That says, you know, you're supposed to be blue next Sunday. What do you want to be next Sunday?
So next Sunday starts Advent, so it's
Yes,
blue.
you want it to be blue, okay.
Yeah. I don't want it to be, but God does.
But whoever wants it to be blue, we will cause it to be blue.
It should be blue, and it will be blue until Christmas.
And
then Christmas is usually white,
okay.
and that goes through Epiphany.
So Christmas Eve is white or blue?
You can pick on that one. I would say people come to it as their Christmas service, so I'd probably move it to white on Christmas Eve.
Okay.
And then white on Christmas Day, and then it stays white
For a
and
while.
by that time, Pastor Jess will be here.
Okay.
So,
All right. I've got it now. We'll go for it. And if people are wondering why the wand didn't work, it's because the piece that belongs on top of it is missing. So if everyone sees that piece,
Yeah.
it would be really nice, because then you can light the candles with it.
yeah, it worked today. But you know, it's those little things you're like, should I tell somebody this? Like, there's no more wick on that. So the acolytes are like, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned that she's gone to Greece. Is that a habit?
No, that was, yep, she travels about 6 months out of the year. No, just kidding. The question was, she's going to Greece, is that a annual thing? And I don't think it is. I think it was an opportunity to go on a trip. So, good question though. I know. I would go too. And you know, really, your council wants to hear your voices. So in a compassionate and grace-filled way, have grace-filled conversations. If it's going well, let them know the things that you think are going well. If you're finding some things to be struggles, in a compassionate and grace-filled conversation, let them know what those struggles are and why they feel like a struggle to you. I think they're there to hear that from you as well. So,
All right. If there's nothing else, I think we can thank Pastor Barb for coming today and